Hello, so this is part 2 to the video I made earlier about the Augustinian theodicy, and this one's basically going to be the Hick Irenaean theodicy. And the Irenaean theodicy was actually devised before Augustine's theodicy, I think by a few centuries, but I don't know exactly on the time scale here, but yeah, and then Hicks is a lot more recent, I think. I probably should check the times, but I think Hicks is perhaps only a few centuries old. Yeah, so I'll just try and recall some of the important points that I'll need to remember for writing an essay on it, and then yeah, hopefully I can remember most of it. Okay, so unlike Augustine's theodicy, I would say Hicks' theodicy is a lot better than it seems to be more relevant, I guess, or has a stronger basis in truth. And the core idea behind it is basically that we have free will, and that's why there's evil in the world. I think he also goes along the same line as Augustine, saying that evil is a privation of good. But God grants humans to have free will, so they can make their own decisions, whether that be good or bad. And this links to the idea of a good robot, and there is no good robot because a robot is programmed to do what it does. It's not good because it can't choose to be good. And it can't choose to be bad. It just does what it's been programmed to do. So if God had programmed humanity to only have the ability to do good things, then it wouldn't necessarily be good. And we can link this to John Keats' poem line, which is a veil of soul making. And this is basically the idea that because humans have free will, and because life is difficult and full of suffering, this allows us to make our souls, I guess, or grow as individuals. It gives us something to work through, and that explains why there's evil and suffering in the world. Because if it wasn't for that, then we wouldn't have to grow. We would already be in a state of perfection. I guess you can say that Hicks' theodicy is a lot more optimistic than Augustine's, because Augustine basically says that all humans are condemned to original sin. They're born bad, basically, and that they're living out the guilt of Adam and Eve eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge and disobeying God. Whereas Hicks says, and he says, so Hicks says that humans aren't necessarily born in a state of sin. We have choice, and we can choose to be good and improve ourselves. Whereas Augustine, he doesn't necessarily think that we can reach a state of perfection until we get to the afterlife. Yeah. So there's a veil of soul making, free will, right? We can actually question this idea of free will, and we can use one of the four horsemen to do it, and we can look at Sam Harris, and Sam Harris basically believes that we don't have free will. We have an ability. I'm not necessarily certain that I agree with him on this, but he basically states that we don't have free will. We don't choose the people we are. We don't choose our genetics. So in that way, we can't control our nature. But he also says that in the light of nurture as well, because our parents also couldn't choose who they were. They couldn't choose their genetics, and they couldn't choose the people that they came to be in the way that they raised us. And I see it as sort of like an evasion of responsibility, and I don't quite know if his logic is somehow fallacious here, because I don't see how we can have no free will yet be able to change ourselves, because actually willingly change ourselves. Like we can choose to take different actions, and then that helps us to, I guess, grow and develop. But if we didn't have free will, we wouldn't have the ability to do that. He does make a good argument. I can see where he's coming from, but I think it's just probably sophistry. Like, I can't see how we don't have any free will. I feel like he's basing his argument off a different definition to free will than most people. He says that we don't choose the thoughts that we think before we've thought them. It's like our brain just throws them at us. It's not like we're constantly controlling the things that are going on within our minds, and that does make sense. It's a good argument. But the things I have problems with is that I think people do have an ability to change themselves, and Sam seems to think this as well, but he seems to still go along the lines of we don't have free will, and I can't get around the idea that if we don't have free will, then how do we develop ourselves? Is it even coming from us, or can we take any credit for changing ourselves? Anyway, that's a little bit of a rant on free will, but if, let's say, Sam was right about free will, we can link this back to Hicks' theodicy and basically say that if evil is a result of free will, and we don't choose our actions necessarily, then that can't be an excuse for evil in the world. For evil coexisting with God. This is complicated. Yeah, I'm really stuck on the idea of whether we have free will or not. I feel like I know where Sam's coming from, but I'm not with him completely. Yeah. So I feel like Sam takes this stance because of his religious beliefs, because he's an atheist. So the way to get around a theodicy is basically to say that we have free will that allows God to coexist in a world coexist in an evil world, or a world which encompasses suffering. And we can go back to the inconsistent triad. So you've got your triangle, you've got an omnibenevolent being, so all loving, with an omnipotent being, all powerful and evil. These three things can't coexist logically, and that's the logical problem of evil. But then you bring free will into the picture. It's like, okay, well, why would why would an all-loving being allow suffering to go on in the world when he has, by definition, the power to change it, the power to remove it? And you could say, well, perhaps God is constrained by his own attributes, and I feel like this is something that Boethius went along the lines of, or maybe Richard Swinburne. I'm thinking Boethius. God is constrained by his own attributes, so he chooses not to intervene because that would undermine his omnibenevolence because an all-loving God would have an epistemic distance between us, so he's not like a tyrant in the sky. It's not like we have to constantly do good out of fear, because is fearing to do good really doing good? Is if you do good out of a fear of being caught or a fear of being punished, is it necessarily that you're really being good, or is it the case that you're doing it for some other reason? Surely good has to be a choice, and that's the epistemic distance. It's a distance in what we can know about God. So God distances himself from us, which allows us to have free will, and then that explains why there's evil in the world. It's not that God brings it about, it's just that people choose to be bad. People have that ability to choose to be bad, and the fact that we have an ability to choose to be bad almost gives value to the good people, or the good things that people do, because they also choose to do that. But then obviously you come back with it, Sam Harris's point, and say, well, we don't have free will. And I can sort of I guess we can explore the free will idea a little bit more, even though I've focused on it for quite a big part of this video. But but I'm not sure how much we really understand the human mind. I like watching videos about hypnosis. And Derren Brown's probably one of my favourites. I don't know. Yeah, I'll say Derren Brown's probably one of my favourites, and he does mind tricks where he can actually make people think that he's reading their mind when really he's actually planted the thought or the image in there beforehand through verbal cues and using his body language. For example, if he wanted someone to see a triangle or say a triangle, he might do things like this, but with both hands, but they're obviously discreetly. But the subconscious mind picks up on that from the other person, and then they might think up the shape of a triangle. Like, unconsciously, they'll think it's came from their own mind when it hasn't. So it's like, okay, well, do we have free will in that case? No, we don't. We can't choose the thoughts that we're going to have. And this is one of the cases that Sam makes as well. He says, pick a country. So you might pick Barcelona. I think Barcelona's a country. Okay, well, let's stick to countries I know. England. Why didn't you pick Brazil? Why didn't you pick France? It's like you didn't have free will to choose which country you picked. It's just you picked a country which came to mind, which was perhaps a result of some sort of imagery you might have seen throughout the day. You've been influenced by previous events, and it's like in this present moment you don't have full control over your being. There's things going on under the surface which you can't control, and that does make sense to say that we don't have free will in that circumstance, and probably in a lot of circumstances as well. But we can definitely shape our environment around us to suit our needs. It's like we can't necessarily treat ourselves as a tyrant and a slave at the same time. We can't force ourselves to do things, but we can almost negotiate with ourselves, and this is going along the lines of Jordan Peterson almost. It's like this would allow free will to be absent, I guess, but not completely. The idea that we can't choose the thoughts we think consciously, but we can almost alter our experience to be able to align in a certain way. So we can't just say we want to feel this now. We almost have to do certain things to be able to put ourselves into that state, and those things are non-negotiable almost, but there's lots of them, and we can look at the Sam Harris's moral landscape here as well. It's like so you basically picture a landscape. It's going to cut out soon. Picture a landscape with like loads of different peaks and troughs. So there's mountains and valleys, and all of the mountains they're all good, but the different forms of good. It's not that there's necessarily one good, and to be able to get on those mountains, you have to play by the rules. You have to do certain things which allow you to access those higher planes of existence almost. So it's like you might have to, if you're feeling really shit, you might have to go for a run. You can't just make yourself feel good like that. You can't choose it. You have to do an action which will lead you to feel good. Anyway, it's going to cut on us, so thanks for watching.